The miniature wargame hobby is bigger, better, and more inclusive than ever. But it wasn't always that way. There was a time when the vast majority of miniature sculptors were young, white, middle-class guys living in England. People whose only exposure to foreign cultures was a Friday night curry and the movie Zulu. Bloody good movie, mind. It might not be too surprising then to say that miniature wargaming has sometimes tripped, stumbled, and fallen flat on its face when it comes to depicting people other than white Europeans. And the French. So let us go back then to the olden days when there really was a ton of racist shit. Luckily, such days are behind us, and I'm happy to say that all of the models in this list have been discontinued. Sorry, what's that? 2 of them are still being sold today. One of them comes in the starter box of one of the biggest miniature war games ever made. Who created this? Those guys, but I have loads of their games. Jesus. Well, I guess that one might be the worst. Alright then, hold on to your fez, nosebone, and or coolie hat as we run through the 5 most racist miniatures ever conceived, thought of, and played with. And a quick caveat, I just want to make it clear right now that I am no expert in race relations. So let's go, what's first in our line of problematic and racist miniatures? Drumroll please! We have the entire Araby line. Yay! They couldn't appear in Total War Warhammer 2, so they're on this list. So Araby, the old Warhammer fantasy setting. Warhammer fantasy, of course, being my favorite setting for any miniature wargame. But let's be honest here, it wasn't exactly the most enlightened of settings, and it frequently indulged in, how to put this, problematic imagery. We aren't including the implications of savage orcs and pre-Columbian lizard men in this one. And Araby were no exception. They were probably the most fleshed out of all of the side factions that came across as a little bit racist. And to see why, you only need to look at their models. See, unlike Cathay and Nippon, Games Workshop actually did quite a bit with Araby back in the 80s. For such an obscure faction, they actually got a fair amount of models. And as far as miniatures go, they look kind of good, actually. I actually like the style of Araby, and I first encountered them when I was pretty young, and I've always been pretty enamored with the exaggerated Arabian Nights setting. And I know for a fact that lots and lots of people really like Araby as a faction, and plenty of people probably don't even get why this faction would raise any eyebrows at all. They're just fantasy, medieval Arabia. But, well, the issues go to the very core of how this faction is depicted. In the fluff, they are described as hot-tempered, greedy, and cruel. Though don't worry, they often frequently go on exotic adventures. Yeesh. And while they're written pretty well in some places, that isn't reflected in the models. See, if you look at the miniatures themselves, you're gonna see a lot of different stuff. You've got elephant riders, Ottoman janissaries, genies, flying carpets, desert nomads. It's a weird smorgasbord of various different cultures from all different times and places. And they've all been slammed under this single flag of Araby. This would be like a Europa faction in the game, which has a lasso spinning cowboy paired with a Roman legionary. It's basically everything that isn't sub-Saharan Africa and China rolled into one and called the East.
Well, that's fine, because I'm not an Arab.
Well, you're all Arabs to me.
And unfortunately, these minis indulge in white European stereotypes of Arabic and Middle Eastern peoples. Stereotypes which have been used as propaganda to generalize a wide and diverse peoples. So you can see why this might be a little problematic. Now, in my opinion, Araby can be done pretty well, and I would love to see a modern reimagining of this faction in the same style that Cathay and the Norskins were treated by Creative Assembly. But all that said, Araby are probably the least problematic in this list, so hold on to your jockstraps. And seeing as we are now in Citadel/Games Workshop's line of miniatures, why not stick around their closet and probe their dirtiest little secret? The models they don't want you to know about. We're talking, of course, about the Pygmies. Ooh. These models are pretty notorious and were sculpted in 1985 by the Perry brothers to promote a Warhammer RP scenario called the Floating Gardens of Babylon. And this was a competitive event designed to introduce the realm of Lustria, aka Lizardman Central, aka South America. The players were expected to be Pygmies in this scenario, and the scenario itself was sort of constructed on that premise. So for example, the tunnels that the players had to enter were at a reduced size. There were witch doctors, Pygmy ancestor spirits, and special Pygmy magic. Yeah, so the racist models also came with racist rules. Yikes. And of course, all of this draws from a whole slew of colonialist, savage peoples tropes. In terms of the models themselves, we've got shrunken heads from the Javaroan people of Central South America, while the Pygmies as a people are clearly meant to be African. Blowguns, though, are typically more traditional of Southeast Asia and Pacific Island cultures. Again, we have a smorgasbord of cultures reduced into one, with the added extra of being a super racist caricature of black people. Clearly, these were inspired by the old colonialist tropes and stories, but that doesn't make them any better. Luckily though, these models are pretty rare to encounter in the wild. That was a poor choice of words, oh my god. Now let's cut Games Workshop some slack here. They weren't the only miniature designers to have created some pretty problematic minis. Warlord Games, for example. They do a lot of mini war games, but without a doubt, the crown jewel in their lineup is that of Bolt Action. This is the premier historical war game where you get to play as a belligerent faction in World War II. And it is arguably the most popular World War II miniature war game. And the models for the game itself look like they've come straight out of a 60s action comic. Bolt Action isn't exactly meant to be a 100% accurate portrayal of World War II. Instead, it's more casual and focused on just feeling authentic. Still though, there's a 60s action comic, and then there's 60s action comic. The latter of which seems to have been the inspiration behind these embellished depictions of Japanese soldiers. Seriously, Warlord, you probably should have taken your own advice and strayed a little bit further from the source material here. And without a doubt, the worst offenders have to be the Japanese infantry models contained within the Island Assault starter box. I recently picked up this box to review for the channel. I opened it up, saw the head sculpts for the Japanese infantry, and just thought, Jesus Christ, they are blatant caricatures. They have all of the classic tropes: comically bucked teeth, tiny little glasses, little beady eyes. They may as well be played by Mickey Rooney. It seriously feels like the sculptor's only reference point for these miniatures was a 1940s propaganda slap-a-jab poster. Whew. And this is in the starter set of a modern miniatures war game. This isn't some obscure relic from the 80s. Bolt Action was started in 2012. There's no excuse for these models, and I am flabbergasted that Warlords has continued to sell them. I look forward to covering this more in my review of the Island Assault starter box. Models well sculpted, good value for money, super racist. So if you want to see my review when it comes out, make sure to subscribe. And for our next contender, oh hey, it's our old pal, Games Workshop from the 80s. It's called the Moneylender, and it's from 1980. Part of the Citadel Fantasy Special Villagers range. And yeah, this is clearly just an anti-Semitic portrayal of a Jewish person. And they have even been cast in the stereotypical role of a moneylender. This is a racist trope so enduring that medieval peasants would be able to recognize it. In fact, this model actually reflects the eternal Jew. This is a piece of Nazi propaganda designed to instill hatred of the Jewish people. Literally, this model could be on the billboard for that exhibition. And at this stage, it's probably fair to point out that this model would have been made closer to the Holocaust than it is to the modern day. There were Jewish Holocaust survivors in the British workforce when this model was created. And this is like a Borat level depiction of a Jewish person. Still though, at least it's out of print. And speaking of Borat level depictions, I want you to picture the scene. You've got your hands on one of the most beloved British IPs in history. You have been granted license to create miniatures for Discworld, the setting of the popular novels by the late great Terry Pratchett. Someone who took great pride in the fact that they were the most shoplifted author in all of Britain. So what will you do with this world of possibilities? There are all sorts of whimsical, wondrous characters that you could create. Will it be the Onery Watchman Samuel Vimes? Or a sour-faced old witch like Granny Weatherwax? Or perhaps death himself strikes your fancy. Or you could even do fuck me. Yeah, so this is Twoflower, and he's sort of meant to be a caricature of a tourist, but he kinda looks like this. So in the first book that Twoflower actually appears in, which also happens to be the first book in Discworld, this was called The Color of Magic. Twoflower was an insurance salesman on holiday, complete with socks and sandals and a magic camera. He wasn't actually described as Asian in the books, and the TV movie adaptation for him on Sky One made him a very American character, which really fit. But yeah, this is the miniature you get. Now, in fairness to the sculptor of this model, they based the design of this sculpt on a classic illustration done by Paul Kidby, one of the artists for Discworld. So the sculptors didn't really have a lot else to go on. So yeah, Twoflower is just a yellow-skinned, buck-toothed, squinty-eyed Asian tourist. Or at least he was when Paul Kidby took over, I guess. I genuinely cannot fathom why anybody feels like this model is okay. Even the paint choice for his skin is cadmium yellow. Who painted this model? Who took the pictures? How did things get to this stage without anybody questioning this decision? And why is this model still being sold on Wayland Games right now? Wow. Talk about yeesh. Incidentally, the original artwork for Twoflower was a little bit of a nightmare and will haunt my dreams tonight. Apparently Josh Kirby, the original artist, took the term four-eyed literally. And instead of drawing glasses, we got 4 eyes. But yeah, still not as bad as this version. And honestly, although many of the miniatures discussed today are really bad, it's the ones that are still being sold that are particularly egregious. There's really no place for these kinds of depictions in this hobby. It's absolutely fucking wild to me that they are still being sold. The Warlord Games one especially surprised me. And it seems like there's just a general acknowledgement within the bolt action community that some of the Japanese sculpts are just racist. And like, what the fuck? Like, that sucks. I want to play bolt action. I want to own a Japanese army. I want to collect an Imperial Japanese army for bolt action, but like, this makes me way too uncomfortable. And though these models aren't the only miniatures in the world that are super problematic, if I were to do all of them, then this would be a very long video. Now, that said, there are plenty of miniatures depicting different people and different cultures responsibly, and even Games Workshop have gotten better at this in recent history. They have moved on from the 80s in some ways. Though that's not to say they haven't had problems with Nazis relatively recently, so check out this video to find out more. And as always, a huge thanks to my patrons who help make this channel possible. So if you want to help support videos like this, please check out the link to my Patreon in the description below. That's patreon.com/discoursminiatures. And I want to thank especially Steven Jackson and Earthwormia for your generosity. And as always, I'll see you next time. Bye-bye!